My son threw my life's possessions into the trash, and his wife sneered, "You're not needed anymore. Get out." I stood among my broken memories, smiled, and made one call. 3 days later, they were frantically searching for me, leaving 76 missed calls. They thought they'd erased me, but they were wrong. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The first thing I noticed wasn't the house. It was the pile. My pickup truck coughed to a stop in front of what used to feel like home, and there it was, a mountain of belongings scattered beside the dumpster like yesterday's garbage. Cardboard boxes torn open, contents spilling onto the pavement in a chaos I couldn't quite process. Those are my things. The thought hit me before I even turned off the engine. My hands stayed gripped on the steering wheel, knuckles white against the worn leather. 3 days of fishing up at Lucky Peak had left me tired but peaceful. That peace evaporated like morning mist. I climbed out slowly, my joints protesting after the long drive. The cool May afternoon carried the smell of rain and something else, the musty odor of clothes that had been sitting outside too long. My work boots crunched on gravel as I approached the pile, each step feeling heavier than the last. There, half buried under a tangle of winter coats, was the photo, our wedding picture from 42 years ago. The glass was cracked diagonally across Martha's face, her smile split by a jagged line. Dirt clung to the silver frame I'd polished just last month. Someone made a mistake. This has to be a mistake. But the evidence kept mounting. My anniversary watch, the Timex Martha had saved 3 months to buy me, lay face down in a puddle, its crystal shattered. The leather band was soaked through, probably ruined. I picked it up with shaking fingers, water dripping between my knuckles. My fishing gear was scattered everywhere. Tackle boxes split open, lures and sinkers mixing with kitchen utensils and old photographs. The rod I'd used for 20 years lay snapped in half, its guides torn away like broken teeth. Someone had thrown my entire life onto the street with all the care they'd give to actual trash. The boxes told their own story, hastily packed, roughly handled, torn at the corners where they'd been dragged or dropped. My name was still visible on one side, written in Martha's careful handwriting from our last move. The ink had run in the damp air, making my own name look like a watercolor mistake. I found my work shirts in a heap, the ones I'd worn to the factory for 30 years. Oil stains and all, they'd been mine. Now they lay wrinkled and dirty, trampled by whoever had hauled them out here. My steel-toed boots, the good pair I kept for church and special occasions, sat upside down with mud caked in the treads. What the hell happened here? The question burned in my chest as I stood surrounded by the debris of my life. Neighbors' windows remained dark despite the commotion. No one came out to explain or help. The entire street felt hollow, like everyone was holding their breath and waiting for me to disappear. My phone buzzed against my hip. For a moment, hope flared. Maybe Floyd calling to explain. Maybe someone from the city saying they'd made an error. But it was just a text from the bait shop, confirming my receipt from this morning, the normal world continuing while mine fell apart. I reached down and lifted Martha's jewelry box, its wooden surface scratched and one corner dented. The velvet lining had come loose, and her few precious pieces were scattered in the dirt. Her mother's ring, the one she'd planned to pass down to Floyd's future daughter. Now it was coated in grime, lying next to a bottle cap and cigarette butts. The reality settled over me like a cold fog. This wasn't random. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had deliberately packed up everything I owned and thrown it away like refuse. Someone had made a choice to destroy 40 years of careful preservation, 40 years of memories, 40 years of building a life. I straightened up, my back aching from bending over the scattered belongings. The house loomed in front of me, its windows dark and unwelcoming. I needed answers. I needed to understand why my entire existence was now decorating the street like a yard sale gone wrong. Time to find out what's really going on here. I walked toward the front door, stepping over more scattered papers and broken picture frames. Each footstep felt deliberate now, purposeful. Someone was going to explain this mess, and they were going to explain it right now. The key slid into the lock, turned halfway, then stopped dead. I tried again, applying more pressure, wiggling the metal back and forth like I'd done 1,000 times before. Nothing. The lock refused to budge, as solid and unyielding as if I'd been trying to open a bank vault with a butter knife. They changed the locks. They actually changed the locks on my own house. My hands were shaking now, making it harder to work the key. I pulled it out and examined it closely, as if the brass might have somehow transformed during my fishing trip. Same worn edges, same scratches I'd memorized over the years. The lock was different, not the key. I fumbled for my phone, scrolling through contacts with clumsy fingers. Floyd first. He'd explain this mess, sort everything out. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before clicking to voicemail. His voice cheerful and recorded. "You've reached Floyd Riley. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." "Floyd, it's Dad. I just got back from fishing and all my stuff is on the street. The locks are changed. What's going on? Call me back right away." I tried Pamela next, though talking to my daughter-in-law always felt like walking through a minefield. Same result, straight to voicemail. Her message was shorter, crisper. "You know what to do." Standing there on my own front porch, locked out like a stranger, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't some mix-up or emergency repair. Someone had planned this. Someone had waited for me to leave town, then systematically erased me from the place I'd called home for 15 years. The afternoon shadows were getting longer, and the spring air carried a chill that hadn't been there an hour ago. I walked across the yards to Simon's house, my neighbor of 8 years. If anyone knew what had happened, it would be him. The man noticed everything: which newspapers people read, when they left for work, who visited when. I knocked on his door, 3 sharp raps that echoed in the quiet street. Footsteps approached, cautious and measured. The door opened just wide enough for Simon's weathered face to appear, his eyes darting past me toward my scattered belongings. "Simon, do you know what happened here? All my stuff is on the street, and I can't get into my house." His expression shifted, uncomfortable and evasive. "Sorry, Otis. I haven't noticed anything unusual. Maybe some kind of mistake." "Mistake?" I gestured toward the pile of my possessions. "That's 40 years of my life sitting next to the garbage. Someone changed my locks while I was gone fishing. You had to have seen something." Simon's gaze flickered away, focusing on something behind my shoulder. "I've been busy with my garden. Didn't really pay attention to what was happening over there." The lie hung between us like smoke. Simon had been retired for 6 years and spent most days positioned at his front window, watching the neighborhood like a security guard. He knew exactly what had happened, but he wasn't going to tell me. "Look, if you need somewhere to make phone calls or wait for your family, you're welcome to—" "Thanks, but I'll manage." He nodded quickly, clearly relieved. "Well, I hope you get it sorted out." The door closed with a soft click, leaving me standing alone on his porch. Even Simon, who'd borrowed my tools and shared beers on summer evenings, was cutting me loose. Whatever had happened here, the whole neighborhood was in on it or too scared to get involved. I walked back to my belongings, each step heavier than the last. The pile looked even more pathetic in the fading light, like the remnants of someone's entire existence scattered for the world to see. I found an old lawn chair among the debris, aluminum frame bent but still functional, and set it up next to the largest box. My phone showed no new messages. I tried Floyd again, then Pamela. Both calls went straight to voicemail without even ringing this time. Either their phones were off, or they were deliberately avoiding me. Given the evidence surrounding me, I was betting on the latter. The street grew quieter as dinner time approached. Other houses showed signs of life, lights coming on, garage doors opening as people returned from work. But nobody stopped to ask if I needed help or wondered why an elderly man was sitting among garbage bags full of possessions. They all seemed to know something I didn't. I settled deeper into the chair, pulling my jacket tighter against the cooling air. Whatever game was being played here, I was apparently the only one who didn't know the rules. But I'd learned patience in 65 years of living, and stubbornness in 30 years of factory work. I could wait. They'd have to come home eventually, and when they did, I'd get my answers. The sky was beginning to turn purple at the edges, and streetlights were starting to flicker on one by one. I checked my phone again, still nothing. But I wasn't going anywhere, not until someone explained why my entire life had been thrown away like yesterday's trash. I had nowhere else to go anyway. 4 hours passed like a slow bleed. I'd sorted through most of my belongings by the time their car pulled into the driveway. Some things were salvageable, clothes that could be washed, books that had only gotten damp. Other items were ruined beyond repair, casualties of their hasty eviction. The anniversary watch was definitely gone, its face clouded with moisture and hands frozen at 2:17. The Honda Civic's headlights swept across the pile as Pamela parked, illuminating the chaos like a crime scene. I stood up from the lawn chair, my joints screaming after hours of sitting in the cool air. Relief flooded through me despite everything. Finally, someone who could explain this nightmare. Floyd got out of the passenger side, his movements careful and deliberate. He looked older than his 42 years, shoulders slumped under the weight of something I couldn't identify. Pamela emerged from the driver's side with her usual brisk efficiency, her blonde hair perfect despite the long day. "Floyd! Pamela! Thank goodness you're here." I walked toward them, gesturing at the scattered belongings. What happened? Why are my things on the street? I can't get into the house. Someone changed the locks while I was fishing. Pamela didn't break stride, walking past me like I was invisible. She pulled grocery bags from the trunk with sharp, angry movements. When she finally looked at me, her expression was cold enough to freeze water. "Because you're no longer needed here, Otis." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually took a step backward, blinking in confusion. "What do you mean, not needed? This is my home. I live here." "Lived," she corrected, slamming the trunk shut. "Past tense. The mortgage is paid off now. Your job here is done. Take your junk and get out." "My job?" The phrase made no sense. "Pamela, I don't understand what you're talking about. This is my house. I've been paying the mortgage for—" "Exactly?" Her smile was sharp as broken glass. "You paid it off. Mission accomplished. We don't need you anymore." I turned to Floyd, desperate for sanity in this madness. "Son, what is she talking about? Tell me what's going on here." Floyd couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the ground, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, like a guilty child. "Sorry, Dad," he mumbled, barely audible. "We tried to make it work, but—" "But what?" I reached toward him, and he actually flinched away from my touch. "Floyd, look at me. I'm your father. I've lived in this house for 15 years. I pay for the groceries, the utilities, the repairs. This is my home." Pamela laughed, a sound like breaking ceramic. "Your home? You were a tenant, Otis. A very useful tenant, who paid all our bills and asked for nothing in return. But tenants can be evicted when they're no longer convenient." The cruelty of it stole my breath. I looked between them, my son avoiding my gaze, my daughter-in-law smiling with obvious satisfaction. The streetlight cast harsh shadows across their faces, making them look like strangers. "I helped you buy this house," I said slowly, each word carefully measured. "When you couldn't qualify for the mortgage, I co-signed. When you couldn't make the payments, I covered them. When you needed a down payment for Floyd's car, I gave you my savings. Everything I had, I gave to this family." "And we're grateful," Pamela said with mock sincerity. "Really, we are. But gratitude doesn't mean we have to house you forever. You're old, Otis. You take up space. You track mud through my clean house. You leave dishes in the sink and watch television too loud. We want our lives back." Floyd shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. My own son, standing there while his wife dismantled our relationship with surgical precision. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike, helped with homework, supported through college, reduced to a silent accomplice in my exile. "Where am I supposed to go?" The question came out smaller than I intended, tinged with a vulnerability that made me hate myself. "That's not our problem anymore." Pamela headed toward the front door, grocery bags in hand. "You're a grown man. Figure it out." "Floyd." I tried one last time, putting every ounce of paternal authority into his name. "Look at me, son." He raised his eyes for just a moment, and what I saw there was worse than hatred. It was nothing. Complete, empty indifference, like I was already dead to him. "The locks are changed," Pamela called over her shoulder. "Don't try to get in. I'll call the police if I have to." The front door opened and closed, leaving me alone under the streetlight with my scattered possessions. The porch light came on, then immediately went off again, a clear message that I wasn't welcome even near the entrance. I stood there for a long moment, processing what had just happened. 42 years of fatherhood, erased. 15 years of generosity, forgotten. A lifetime of love and sacrifice, dismissed like an inconvenient bill. But beneath the hurt, something else was growing. Something harder and colder than the evening air. They thought they could use me up and throw me away like garbage. They thought they could steal everything I'd worked for and then lock me out of my own life. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The door clicked shut with a finality that echoed through my bones. I stood there, frozen on the sidewalk, staring at the house that had been my home for 15 years. The porch light went dark again, leaving me in the amber glow of the streetlight. 8 years. 8 years since that conversation in the kitchen when Floyd had looked me in the eyes and promised we'd always be family. His voice came back to me, younger and full of hope. "Dad, if you help us with the mortgage, we'll always be together. This is our family home now." I could see him so clearly in my memory, leaning against the counter with that earnest expression he'd inherited from his mother. Pamela had been there too, her hair shorter then, her smile warmer. Or maybe it had just seemed warmer because I'd wanted to believe it. "You'll always have a home with us, Mr. Riley," she'd said, using my formal name like she always did back then. "We want you to feel like this is your place too." How naive I'd been. How desperate to believe that my son still needed me, still wanted me around. Martha had been gone 2 years by then, and the house felt too empty, too quiet. When Floyd called about their mortgage troubles, I jumped at the chance to help, not just with money, with belonging somewhere again. "Family takes care of family," I told them, signing the papers that made me responsible for their debt. "Of course I'll help." Floyd had hugged me that day. Actually hugged me, something he hadn't done since his teenage years. "I promise, Dad, you'll never regret this. Never regret this." The words tasted bitter now. I thought about the gradual changes, how the first few years had been good. Family dinners, holiday celebrations, Floyd asking my advice about work problems. I'd felt useful, needed, but somewhere around 2020, things began shifting. Invitations to dinner became less frequent. Conversations grew shorter. My opinions were dismissed more quickly. By 2023, I was eating most meals alone in my room. Pamela would sigh when I used the kitchen, as if my presence was an inconvenience she barely tolerated. Floyd stopped asking for advice and started looking through me instead of at me. They'd developed a language of glances and subtle signals that excluded me completely, but I'd told myself it was temporary stress. Floyd's job, Pamela's moods, the usual ups and downs of family life. I'd made excuses for them the way parents do, finding reasons to justify behavior that grew increasingly cold and dismissive. The pattern was clear now, viewed from this side of betrayal. The closer we got to paying off the mortgage, the worse they treated me, as if my usefulness had an expiration date tied directly to the loan balance. Every payment I made toward their debt was one step closer to my eviction. They'd been planning this. Maybe not from the beginning, but certainly for months. You don't change locks on impulse. You don't pack someone's entire life into boxes without forethought. This had been calculated, methodical, timed perfectly for my fishing trip. 8 years of mortgage payments. 8 years of buying groceries, paying utilities, covering repairs. 8 years of believing I was investing in family when I was actually funding my own disposal. The street was quiet, except for the distant hum of highway traffic. Other houses showed signs of normal family life, television screens flickering behind curtains, porch lights welcoming people home. But nobody emerged to check on the old man standing among garbage bags full of belongings. Even in suburbia, people minded their own business when it came to family drama. I pulled my jacket tighter against the evening chill. Standing here feeling sorry for myself wouldn't change anything. Floyd had made his choice, and it wasn't me. Pamela had won whatever game she'd been playing all these years. They'd gotten what they wanted, a paid-off house and freedom from the inconvenience of gratitude. But they'd made one critical error in their calculations. They'd assumed I was powerless, that an old man with nowhere to go would simply disappear quietly into whatever assistance programs existed for discarded parents. They'd treated me like I was already dead, just a burden waiting to be buried. Time to show them how wrong they were. I turned away from the house and walked back toward my scattered belongings, my footsteps steady and purposeful. The pile looked different now, not like trash, but like evidence. I approached my scattered possessions with a mechanic's eye, assessing what could be salvaged and what deserved to be abandoned. 40 years of factory work had taught me to think systematically, to solve problems through careful analysis rather than emotional reaction. This was just another problem requiring a practical solution. The wedding photo went into the cab of my truck first, cracked glass and all. Some things were worth preserving regardless of damage. Martha's jewelry box followed, along with the few pieces of her mother's costume jewelry that had survived Pamela's hasty packing. Not valuable to anyone else, but priceless to me. My work tools were scattered among the clothes and household items. The socket set I'd owned for 30 years, still in perfect condition. The level that had helped me build Floyd's treehouse when he was 8. These tools had value beyond sentiment. They represented skills and capabilities that Floyd and Pamela had forgotten I possessed. I loaded them carefully into the truck bed, each wrench and screwdriver finding its proper place in the toolbox. Organization mattered. Preparation mattered. If I was going to rebuild my life from scratch at 65, I'd need every advantage I could gather. The clothes were a mixed blessing. Most of my work shirts had survived intact, along with several pairs of jeans and my winter coat. The formal wear was ruined. The suit I'd worn to Martha's funeral was stained and wrinkled beyond recovery, but I wouldn't need formal clothes for what came next. A car slowed as it passed, the driver craning his neck to stare at the old man loading garbage into a pickup truck. I met his gaze steadily until he looked away and drove on. Let them stare. Let the whole neighborhood see what Floyd and Pamela had done. Shame was a tool that cut both ways. My fishing gear had taken a beating, but most of it was salvageable. The broken rod could be replaced, and the tackle boxes just needed reorganizing. Fishing had always been my escape, my time to think clearly without interference. I'd need that clarity in the coming weeks. Papers and documents were scattered like leaves after a storm. I gathered them methodically. Insurance policies, bank statements, tax returns. Important information that Floyd and Pamela had thrown away as carelessly as everything else. Did they think I existed only within the walls of their house? Did they imagine I had no financial life beyond paying their bills? That was their second critical error. They knew I had savings. They'd seen me write checks for their expenses year after year, but they'd never bothered to learn the full extent of my resources. To them, I was just a convenient source of monthly payments, not a man who'd worked steadily for 40 years and lived below his means. The anniversary watch was beyond repair, its crystal shattered and movement flooded. I held it for a moment, remembering Martha's pride when she'd presented it to me wrapped in newspaper, because we couldn't afford fancy gift paper back then. Then I dropped it into one of the damaged boxes I was leaving behind. Some symbols of the past needed to stay buried. Simon's house remained dark, though I could see the faint glow of a television through his living room curtains, probably watching me through a gap in the blinds, cataloging details he could share with other neighbors tomorrow. The whole street would know about Floyd's ingratitude by morning, though none of them would intervene. Suburban politeness had its limits. 43 years I'd worked to support this family. First Martha and baby Floyd when money was tight and factory jobs were uncertain. Then just Floyd through his teenage years, college tuition, and early career struggles. Finally, Floyd and Pamela, helping them achieve the middle-class stability I'd never quite managed for myself. Time for a return on that investment. The truck bed was nearly full now, packed with everything that mattered. I'd have to leave some furniture behind, the dresser Martha had refinished, the recliner where I'd watch television most evenings. But material possessions were just weight now. I needed mobility, flexibility, freedom to act without encumbrance. I took one last look around the debris field that had been my life 2 hours ago. Amazing how quickly 40 years could be reduced to what fit in a pickup truck. But reduction also meant distillation, keeping only what was essential, valuable, meaningful. Floyd and Pamela thought they'd won by throwing me away. They thought clearing me out of their house would clear me out of their lives. They'd underestimated the difference between disposing of someone and actually getting rid of them. I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine caught immediately, reliable machinery responding to experienced hands. In the rearview mirror, I could see the house growing smaller as I drove away, its windows dark and unwelcoming. But I wasn't disappearing into the night like they expected. I was just changing positions, moving to higher ground where I could see the whole battlefield clearly. Time to show them what 43 years of experience looked like when it stopped being grateful. The Budget Inn's neon sign flickered red against the darkness as I pulled into the parking lot. The place looked exactly like what it was, a highway motel for travelers who needed basic shelter without frills. 2 stories of identical doors, ice machines humming at each end, and the persistent smell of highway exhaust mixed with industrial cleaning supplies, perfect for someone who needed to disappear temporarily while planning his next move. The desk clerk was maybe 25, college-aged with tired eyes and the practiced indifference of someone working the night shift. He barely looked up from his magazine when I approached the counter. "How many nights?" he asked, sliding a registration form across the laminated surface. "Just one for now," I replied, signing my name carefully. "We'll see how it goes from there." Room 127 was exactly what I'd expected. A double bed with a floral comforter that had seen better decades, a small table by the window, and a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. The carpet showed traffic patterns from thousands of previous guests, and the heater rattled when it kicked on. But it was clean, private, and $50 for the night. I'd stayed in worse places during my factory years. I carried my boxes inside one at a time, my back protesting after the long day. The truck could stay loaded with everything else. No point unpacking what I'd just have to pack again. But I needed the essentials: clothes for tomorrow, Martha's jewelry box, and the folder of important papers I'd rescued from the debris. The fluorescent bathroom light was harsh after the warm glow of streetlights. In the mirror, I looked older than I'd felt this morning. The day had carved new lines around my eyes, added weight to my shoulders. But my hands were steady, my mind clear. That's what mattered now. I arranged Martha's jewelry box and our wedding photo on the bedside table, creating a small shrine of memory in this temporary space. The cracked glass split her smile in half, but her eyes were unchanged, bright with the optimism that had carried us through 38 years of marriage. She'd known how to love without conditions, how to build rather than destroy. "I should have done this years ago," I told her picture quietly. "Should have seen what they were doing before it got this far." But regret was luxury I couldn't afford. Martha had died believing Floyd was a good man who'd take care of his aging father. I wouldn't dishonor her memory by letting her faith prove unfounded. The motel bed was firm but narrow, nothing like the king-size mattress I'd slept on for the past 8 years. Highway noise filtered through thin walls, trucks downshifting, cars accelerating toward distant destinations. Other guests moving through their own temporary existences, carrying their own problems from one place to another. I lay awake most of the night, not from discomfort, but from mental activity. My mind was processing 8 years of gradual manipulation, cataloging moments I'd misunderstood or ignored. How many times had Pamela made subtle comments about my age, my habits, my inconvenience? How often had Floyd sided with her against me without saying anything directly? The pattern was unmistakable once I stopped making excuses for them. Every kindness I'd shown had been treated as obligation. Every sacrifice had been accepted as my natural duty. They'd trained me to be grateful for less and less until I was grateful just to exist in their space. But they'd made one fundamental miscalculation. They'd assumed that dependency ran only one direction, that I needed them more than they needed me. They'd forgotten that 8 years of mortgage payments created legal relationships beyond family sentiment. They'd overlooked the paperwork they'd signed when I helped them qualify for the loan. By 6 in the morning, I was fully dressed and ready to act. The shower had been lukewarm at best, and the coffee from the lobby machine tasted like it had been brewed sometime last week. But discomfort was temporary. What mattered was momentum, moving forward with purpose instead of wallowing in self-pity. I loaded my remaining belongings back into the truck and checked out at the front desk. The same clerk was still there, looking even more tired after his all-night shift. "Everything work out okay?" he asked automatically. "Better than expected," I replied, meaning it. The morning air was crisp and full of possibility. I had money in the bank, skills that were still valuable, and legal options that Floyd and Pamela didn't know existed. Most importantly, I had the advantage of being underestimated by people who thought they understood me completely. Time to educate them about their mistake. I started the truck and pulled out onto the highway, heading back toward Boise with the same sense of purpose I'd felt 40 years ago when I'd started my first real job. There was work to be done, problems to solve, and justice to serve. Floyd and Pamela had wanted me out of their lives. They were about to discover that sometimes you get exactly what you ask for. The phone book was thin in my hands as I searched for attorneys who worked weekends. Robert Chen's advertisement stood out. Immigration and property law, emergency consultations available. His office number connected me to a tired but professional voice that suggested Saturday morning appointments were possible for urgent matters. Mr. Chen, I need to urgently clarify property ownership matters. There's been a family dispute about a house I've been living in, and I need to understand my legal position. Can you bring the relevant documents? Mortgage papers, deed, anything showing your involvement in the property? I spread the papers I'd rescued from the debris across the motel bed. Everything was there. Loan documents, property tax receipts, insurance policies. 40 years of factory work had taught me to keep records, even when other people handled the details. The drive downtown took 20 minutes through quiet Saturday morning streets. Boise looked different from this perspective, less like the city where my son had betrayed me, more like a place where business got done regardless of family drama. Professional buildings stood ready to solve problems for people willing to pay consultation fees. Chen's office occupied the third floor of a converted brick building near the Capitol. The waiting room was small but clean, decorated with certificates and photographs of successful clients. I was the only person there, clutching a manila folder that might contain my future. Robert Chen turned out to be a compact man in his mid-40s, wearing weekend casual clothes but maintaining professional demeanor. He gestured me into his office and accepted the folder with careful attention to detail. Tell me about the situation first, then we'll review the documents. I explained the basics without emotional embellishment. 8 years of mortgage payments, gradual deterioration of family relationships, sudden eviction and lock changes. Chen nodded occasionally, making notes on a legal pad. Now let's see what the paperwork tells us. He spread the documents across his desk systematically, examining each page with the methodical attention I recognized from my own work habits. When he reached the original deed and mortgage agreement, his eyebrows raised slightly. Mr. Riley, according to these documents, you are the sole owner of the property in question. The words hung in the air like smoke from a welding torch. What about the mortgage? Floyd and Pamela live there. They said I was helping them buy their house. The mortgage was issued in your name only. You qualified for the loan, you've made all the payments, and the property tax records show you as the official owner. Your son and daughter-in-law have no legal claim to the house whatsoever. Chen turned the deed toward me, pointing to the relevant sections. My name appeared in all the critical places: borrower, owner, responsible party. Floyd and Pamela were nowhere to be found in the legal language that actually mattered. But they live there. They've been treating it like their home for 8 years. Living in a property doesn't establish ownership. At best, they could be considered tenants, though I don't see any formal lease agreement. Legally, you have every right to reclaim your property and evict any unauthorized occupants. The satisfaction started in my chest and spread outward, like warmth from a good meal. 8 years of being treated like a burden. 8 years of having my generosity thrown back at me. 8 years of watching my son choose his wife over his father. And all along, they'd been living in my house, eating food I bought, using utilities I paid for, in a home they had no legal right to occupy. What are my options? I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the growing excitement. You could demand they vacate immediately. You could begin formal eviction proceedings. You could sell the property and force them to relocate. As the legal owner, you have considerable leverage in this situation. Chen reviewed the documents once more, checking details with professional thoroughness. The mortgage has been fully satisfied as of last month. You own the property free and clear, worth approximately $400,000 in today's market. $400,000? I'd been living like a charity case in my own $400,000 house, grateful for the privilege of paying other people's bills. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. I'd like copies of everything that establishes my ownership, and I'll need recommendations for a good realtor. Chen efficiently prepared copies while explaining the legal protections of property ownership. Within an hour, I had documentation proving beyond question that Floyd and Pamela had been living rent-free in my house for 8 years. The spring morning felt different as I walked back to my truck. Warmer, brighter, full of possibilities that hadn't existed an hour earlier. I wasn't a homeless old man begging for shelter. I was a property owner who'd been temporarily inconvenienced by squatters. Time to reclaim what was mine and show them the difference between charity and ownership. Walsh Realty's parking lot was empty except for one car when I arrived that afternoon. Sandra Walsh turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her late 30s, who apparently worked weekends for clients serious about buying or selling. Her handshake was firm, her smile professional, and her questions direct. "Mr. Riley, what kind of timeline are we looking at for your property sale?" "As quickly as possible. I need the house listed immediately and shown to serious buyers starting Monday." She pulled up property records on her computer, nodding as details filled the screen. "This is a nice neighborhood. 4-bedroom colonial, good condition from the photos I can see online. What's your asking price range?" "Market value, but the buyer must be ready to move in immediately. The current occupants will need to relocate quickly." Sandra's expression flickered slightly, probably wondering about family dynamics, but she maintained professional focus. "What about the current occupants? Do they need time to find new housing?" "That's no longer my concern. They're adults. They'll figure something out." The coldness in my own voice surprised me, but it felt appropriate. 8 years of concern for Floyd and Pamela's comfort had gotten me thrown out like garbage. Time to prioritize my own interests for a change. We spent an hour reviewing market conditions, pricing strategies, and showing schedules. Sandra was efficient and thorough, treating the sale like any other business transaction. By 4 o'clock, I'd signed listing agreements and arranged for professional photography, Monday morning. "I'll have the property on the MLS system by Tuesday," Sandra promised. "Given the market conditions and location, I expect serious interest within the first week." Perfect. By the time Floyd and Pamela realized what was happening, their housing situation would already be beyond their control. The apartment search took less effort than expected. The third complex I visited had a furnished 1-bedroom, available immediately, clean, basic, month-to-month lease for someone in transition. The manager was happy to expedite the application for a cash deposit and first month's rent. "How long will you be staying?" she asked while processing my credit check. "Until my other housing situation is resolved. Could be a few weeks, could be longer." By 6 o'clock, I was moving my essential belongings from the motel to the apartment. Not much to transport, a few boxes of clothes, important papers, Martha's jewelry box, and my tools. Everything else could wait in the truck until I decided what came next. The apartment was anonymous and temporary, exactly what I needed. Basic furniture, functioning appliances, cable television, and most importantly, a phone line for coordinating the house sale. I arranged my few possessions efficiently, creating a command center for monitoring the situation. I called Sandra from the apartment phone, confirming Monday's photography session and Tuesday's listing activation. "Mrs. Walsh, I want you to know I'll be traveling next week. The house should be shown to any qualified buyers, regardless of whether the current occupants are cooperative." "That's understood, Mr. Riley. As the owner, you have full authority over showing schedules." The legal ownership felt more real each time someone acknowledged it professionally. For 8 years, I'd lived like a guest in my own house. Now, strangers were treating me with the respect that property ownership commanded. I spent the evening organizing my documents and planning next steps. The house would be listed Tuesday. Showings would begin immediately. Serious buyers typically needed 2 to 3 weeks for financing and inspections. Floyd and Pamela would probably discover the sale sometime in the first week, depending on how quickly news traveled through the neighborhood. By then, I'd be unreachable, and the process would be irreversible. I dialed Sandra's number one more time before bed. "Mrs. Walsh, one more thing. I'll be out of town for a while, but you have my full authorization to proceed with all aspects of the sale. Accept any reasonable offer that meets our minimum price." "I'll keep you informed of all developments, Mr. Riley." But I wouldn't be available for updates. That was the beauty of the plan. By the time Floyd and Pamela realized their comfortable life was disappearing, I'd be somewhere they couldn't reach me to beg, threaten, or manipulate. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and distant traffic sounds. Tomorrow, I'd implement the final phase of my strategy. For tonight, I could rest, knowing that justice was finally in motion. 8 years of taking me for granted was about to cost them everything they thought they owned. Sunday morning found me at Boise Airport with a single carry-on bag and no particular destination in mind. The ticket counter agent was helpful when I explained my situation. I'd like to book a flight somewhere warm. Doesn't matter where, as long as I can leave today. She checked availability while I stood there feeling lighter than I had in years. No schedule to maintain, no one expecting me home, no family obligations to consider, just an old man with savings in the bank and time to spend however he chose. There's a flight to Cancun leaving in 3 hours. It's expensive for last-minute booking, but they have seats available. Perfect. Book it. The airport process felt foreign after years of staying close to home. Security lines, boarding announcements, the controlled chaos of people traveling to places that mattered to them. I'd forgotten how exciting movement could be when you chose it yourself instead of having it forced on you. The flight attendant noticed my relaxed demeanor during boarding. "Vacation travel?" she asked while checking my seat assignment. "Something like that. Haven't been somewhere warm in years. Figured it was time to change that." 3 hours later, I was stepping off an airplane into Mexican heat that felt like a blessing after Idaho's stubborn spring cold. Cancun Airport buzzed with tourists and resort representatives, everyone eager to begin or end their temporary escape from reality. The hotel shuttle driver spoke broken English, but perfect enthusiasm. "First time in Mexico, senor?" "First time anywhere in a long time," I admitted, watching unfamiliar landscape roll past the windows. The resort turned out to be exactly what someone fleeing family drama needed. Anonymous, comfortable, and completely disconnected from any responsibilities back home. The front desk clerk handled check-in with cheerful efficiency. "How long will you be staying with us, Mr. Riley?" "Open-ended. I'll let you know when I'm ready to leave." He handed me a key card and information packet about resort amenities. Pool service, beach access, restaurants, activities for guests who wanted structured entertainment. All of it available to someone who just reclaimed ownership of his own life. My room faced the ocean through sliding glass doors that opened onto a private balcony. The sound of waves replaced the memory of suburban silence, and warm air carried scents of salt and tropical vegetation instead of disappointment and betrayal. I stood there for several minutes, letting the contrast wash over me. The first order of business was turning off my phone. Floyd and Pamela would eventually realize something was wrong when they couldn't reach me, but by then the house sale would be in motion and my location would be irrelevant. Let them wonder where I'd gone and why I wasn't available to explain or negotiate. Room service brought lunch to the balcony. Fresh fish, cold beer, fruit that actually tasted like it had grown in sunshine. Simple pleasures that felt revolutionary after months of eating alone in my bedroom, while my own family treated me like an unwelcome boarder. The beach was populated with couples and families enjoying vacations they'd planned and saved for. I found an empty chair under an umbrella and settled in with a book I'd bought at the airport. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be and nothing to prove to anyone. A server approached with the kind of attention that money and leisure commanded. "Another beer, senor? Perhaps something from our cocktail menu?" "Why not? Bring me something tropical. I'm celebrating." "Celebrating what, if you don't mind my asking?" "Freedom," I said, meaning it completely. The afternoon dissolved into a pleasant haze of warmth, alcohol, and the satisfaction that comes from making decisions without consulting anyone else's opinion. Other resort guests moved through their own vacation rhythms, but I was operating on a different timeline entirely. By evening, I was sitting on my balcony watching the sunset paint the ocean in colors I'd forgotten existed. The contrast with Friday night, sitting among garbage bags on a suburban street, was so complete it felt like someone else's memory. Tomorrow, Sandra would begin photographing the house for listing. By Tuesday, Floyd and Pamela would discover their comfortable arrangement was about to change permanently. They'd probably try calling me first, then panicking when they realized I was unreachable. But I'd be here, learning how to relax again while they learned what consequences felt like. The waves kept rolling in with rhythmic persistence, washing away whatever they encountered and starting fresh with each cycle. Sometimes that's exactly what life required: complete erasure of what came before, followed by the patience to build something better. I raised my drink to the darkening sky, toasting the end of being grateful for scraps and the beginning of claiming what was rightfully mine. Monday morning in Cancun arrived with perfect weather and room service coffee that actually tasted like it had been made this century. I spent the early hours on my balcony reading a paperback thriller while waves rolled endlessly onto white sand below. Other resort guests were starting their vacation routines, couples heading to breakfast, families organizing beach gear, groups planning excursions to Mayan ruins, all of them blissfully unaware that hundreds of miles north, a real-life drama was about to unfold. Around 10 o'clock local time, I decided to check my phone. The screen exploded with notifications: 76 missed calls, 43 voicemails, and dozens of text messages. The numbers kept climbing as new calls came in while I scrolled through the chaos. Floyd's number appeared most frequently, but Pamela had contributed her share of desperation to the digital pile. The first few voicemails were confused but demanding, Floyd's voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Dad, call me back immediately. There are people walking through our house taking pictures. What the heck is going on?" Pamela, sharper and more accusatory: "Otis, I don't know what game you're playing, but you need to stop this right now. Call us back." But as the hours progressed, the tone shifted dramatically. Anger gave way to confusion, confusion to panic, panic to desperation. Floyd again, hours later: "Dad, please, we can't reach you anywhere. The realtor says she's working for you. This can't be legal. Where are you?" Pamela, her voice cracking: "Otis, this is our home. You can't just sell our house out from under us. We've been calling everyone we know." I found Sandra Walsh's messages scattered among the family chaos, professional updates delivered with business-like efficiency that contrasted sharply with the emotional meltdown happening elsewhere. Her text from this morning was particularly satisfying. "Mr. Riley, excellent showing yesterday. Young couple very interested, mentioned they could close quickly. They love the neighborhood and see themselves raising children there. Will keep you posted on developments. Perfect. New owners who would actually appreciate the house instead of treating it like a burden they'd inherited." The voicemails continued throughout the day, each one more desperate than the last. Floyd's voice deteriorated from anger to pleading to something approaching genuine fear. "Dad, if you can hear this, we're sorry about how things went. Maybe we can work something out. Please just call us back so we can talk." Pamela tried a different approach, alternating between manipulation and outright begging. "Otis, think about what you're doing. We have nowhere to go. Surely you don't want to make us homeless? You're not that cruel." But the most revealing message came late in the afternoon, Floyd's voice barely holding together. "Dad, I keep thinking about that night when you came back from fishing, the way Pamela talked to you, the way I just stood there and let it happen. I know we messed up, but selling the house won't fix anything. Please just call me back." Finally, some recognition of consequences. Only took them discovering they weren't actually in control of their own living situation. I responded to Sandra's messages with professional efficiency, authorizing additional showings and confirming my interest in serious offers. But the family calls went unanswered. They'd made it clear a month ago that I wasn't needed in their lives. Time for them to experience what not needed actually looked like when the roles were reversed. The resort bar served excellent margaritas with fresh lime and salt that tasted like vacation instead of responsibility. I settled into a poolside chair with my phone silenced, watching families enjoy their temporary paradise while mine imploded in ways they were only beginning to understand. 8 years of mortgage payments had bought me more than just legal ownership. They'd purchased the right to choose who deserved explanations and who deserved silence. Floyd and Pamela had spent those 8 years teaching me that family loyalty was conditional, that gratitude had expiration dates, and that love could be discarded when it became inconvenient. Well, they'd been excellent teachers. Time to show them how well I'd learned their lessons. I extended my stay at the resort for another week, informing the front desk that my plans had become more flexible than originally anticipated. The afternoon stretched ahead, with nothing more demanding than deciding whether to order fish or chicken for dinner. Back in Boise, the phone calls would continue. The panic would intensify. The reality of their situation would sink in with each unanswered ring. But that was their problem now, not mine. 3 weeks later, I returned to Boise with a tan that spoke of extended leisure and a perspective that distance had clarified. The flight from Cancun landed on schedule, and the taxi ride to my downtown apartment felt like visiting a different city. The spring weather had warmed considerably, transforming the landscape from the gray uncertainty I'd left behind to something approaching summer optimism. Even the downtown streets looked more welcoming, though that might have been the effect of no longer feeling trapped by other people's expectations. I was pulling my suitcase from the taxi trunk when familiar voices called my name from across the parking lot. Floyd and Pamela approached like refugees from their own lives. 3 weeks of searching had left visible marks. Floyd looked 10 pounds thinner, his usual neat appearance replaced by rumpled clothes and hollow eyes. Pamela's perfectly maintained image had cracked, revealing someone who'd spent too many sleepless nights, facing consequences she'd never considered possible. "Otis! Finally!" Pamela's voice carried relief mixed with desperation. "We've been looking everywhere for you." Floyd stayed slightly behind his wife, unable to meet my eyes directly. "Dad, please, we need to talk. Don't sell the house. We can work something out." I set my suitcase down carefully, noting how their voices had changed. A month ago, they'd spoken to me with dismissive authority. Now they sounded like people begging for something they couldn't afford to lose. "Work out what exactly?" I kept my voice level, professional. "What is there to discuss?" "We drove to every friend you've ever mentioned," Pamela said, words rushing together. "Your old co-workers, that fishing club, even Martha's sister in Twin Falls. Nobody knew where you'd gone. We were desperate." The word hung between us like smoke. Desperate. A month ago, I'd been the desperate one, sitting among garbage bags while they locked me out of my own house. The symmetry was almost poetic. Interesting choice of words. I picked up my suitcase handle. "A month ago, you told me I wasn't needed anymore. Remember?" Floyd finally looked up, his face showing the kind of regret that only comes from watching comfortable assumptions crumble in real time. "Dad, we made a mistake. Maybe we spoke too quickly, acted too harshly." "Maybe." The word came out sharper than I had intended. "You threw my belongings on the street like garbage. You changed the locks on my own house. You told me to disappear from your lives. And now you're surprised that I took your advice?" Pamela tried a different approach, her voice taking on the manipulative tone I'd heard her use with store clerks and service representatives. "Otis, you're hurting us to hurt us. This isn't about justice. It's about revenge." "Revenge?" I almost laughed. "Pamela, I'm selling my house. My house, which I own, which I paid for, which you have no legal claim to whatsoever. How exactly is disposing of my own property revenge?" The legal reality hit them like cold water. For 8 years, they'd lived as if the house belonged to them, as if my contributions were voluntary charity, rather than an owner maintaining his own property. They'd convinced themselves that possession meant ownership, that living somewhere created rights. "We checked with lawyers," Floyd said quietly. "They told us. They explained about the deed, the mortgage papers. Then you understand the situation." I started walking toward the apartment building entrance. "You're squatting in my house. I'm selling it. The new owners will decide whether they want tenants." They followed me across the parking lot, their desperation growing more evident with each step. 3 weeks of searching for someone who didn't want to be found had apparently taught them the difference between control and dependence. "Dad, we're family," Floyd's voice cracked on the last word. I stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "Family? A month ago, you stood there while your wife told me I wasn't needed anymore. You watched her throw me out like trash, and you said nothing. You chose her over me, Floyd. That was your decision to make, and you made it." "We can pay rent," Pamela interjected desperately. "Whatever the new owners want, we'll pay it." "That's between you and them," I replied, resuming my walk toward the building. "I'll give them your number if they're interested in tenants." The apartment building lobby felt like sanctuary after 3 weeks of ocean views, but for different reasons. This was temporary shelter, but it was shelter I'd chosen, paid for with my own money, free from the obligations and resentments that had poisoned the house they still thought of as home. They continued talking behind me, their voices blending into a desperate chorus of promises they should have made a month ago. But promises offered under duress weren't worth much. They'd shown me their true feelings when they thought I had no power to resist. Now that the power had shifted, their sudden appreciation felt exactly as sincere as it actually was. The elevator doors closed on their continuing pleas, but I could still hear their voices echoing in the lobby as I rose to the fourth floor. My apartment felt exactly as I'd left it, temporary but peaceful, free from the accumulated resentments that had made the house feel like a prison. I unpacked methodically, hanging vacation clothes that smelled like ocean air and possibility instead of obligation and disappointment. When Floyd and Pamela knocked on my door 20 minutes later, I was ready for them. "The sale closes tomorrow," I said through the chain lock. "You have 1 week to pack your belongings and vacate the property. After that, you'll need to discuss housing arrangements with the new owners." "Dad, we're your family." Floyd's voice was breaking completely now. "Family?" I opened the door wider so they could see my face clearly. "A month ago, you threw me out like garbage. You told me I wasn't needed. You changed the locks on my own house. Remember those exact words, Pamela? Take your junk and get out." Pamela tried one last manipulation. "We can pay rent to the new owners. We have good credit, steady income." "That's not my concern anymore." I started closing the door. "You wanted me out of your lives. Congratulations. You got exactly what you asked for." "Please," Floyd put his hand against the doorframe. "We'll do anything. We can change. You had 8 years to change. 8 years to show gratitude instead of entitlement. 8 years to treat me like family instead of a convenient ATM machine." I stepped back from the door. "The new owners are a young couple with children. They'll actually appreciate the house instead of treating it like something they're entitled to." The door closed with a soft click, cutting off their final attempts at negotiation. I spent Tuesday morning at the title company, signing papers that transferred ownership from myself to David and Jennifer Morrison, newlyweds who'd fallen in love with the house and planned to raise their family there. They were everything Floyd and Pamela weren't: grateful, enthusiastic, financially responsible, and genuinely excited about homeownership. "Thank you for accepting our offer so quickly," Jennifer said as we completed the paperwork. "We know other people were interested." "You reminded me why houses exist," I replied. "They're for families who want to build something together, not for people who take blessing for granted." The check for $395,000 felt surprisingly light in my hands. Numbers on paper representing 40 years of work, 8 years of mortgage payments, and 1 month of learning that family loyalty wasn't always reciprocal. But it also represented freedom. Freedom from ungrateful relatives. Freedom from living situations based on guilt rather than respect. Freedom to choose how I spent my remaining years without considering other people's convenience. Sandra Walsh handled the final details with professional efficiency. "The new owners take possession Friday morning. I assume the current occupants will be ready to move." "That's not my responsibility anymore," I said, meaning it completely. By Thursday, I'd closed my downtown apartment lease and loaded my truck with everything I actually needed. The rest, furniture, household items, accumulated objects from a life that no longer existed, went to charity. Martha would have approved of the simplicity. Friday morning found me driving north toward Coeur d'Alene, where lake views and mountain air promised the kind of peace that came from choosing your own neighbors instead of being stuck with relatives who confused proximity with loyalty. The radio played classic country music as I drove through changing landscape, each mile putting more distance between myself and 8 years of being taken for granted. In my rearview mirror, Boise shrank to highway perspective. Just another city where someone had learned the difference between charity and ownership. Floyd and Pamela would figure out their housing situation eventually. Maybe the new owners would rent to them. Maybe they'd find somewhere else. Either way, they'd face their future without the safety net they'd spent 8 years assuming would always catch them. Justice didn't require cruelty, just consequences. They'd taught me that family was conditional, that gratitude had limits, that love could be discarded when it became inconvenient. I'd proven to be an excellent student. The highway stretched ahead like possibility itself, leading toward a life where appreciation wouldn't be taken for granted and family would mean something deeper than convenient obligation. Sometimes the best revenge was simply letting people experience the natural results of their own choices. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.